this is a sustained thing and they don't have Brock Purdy moving forward for the season or for a long stretch, it's going to be hard for them to be their best. I think it's going to be a lot harder to win than you have a guy who's a $50+ million a year quarterback, because so much of what Brock does is with his feet, with his capacity to extend. But I don't think anybody would think, yeah, we're just going to operate at the same hum with our backup quarterback in there and all sorts of injuries on the perimeter.
Excited to have this conversation. Joining us on the River Islands guest line, JT O'Sullivan, not only a former Niners quarterback, but how's the QB school going, man? I you know that I love the videos. How's it all going?
I mean, there's never been a better time to be a content creator, y'all. Everybody's an all-22 expert. I love it out there.
Totally. Is there competition amongst you all? Like, do you see some of these other creators and you're like, man, they don't know what they're talking about. Come on.
I honestly don't think there is. I don't know how the other guys do it, but I do a pretty decent job of making sure that the first opinion I give is my opinion. So it's kind of nice to stay out of those waters, but it's one of those things where so many people are doing it. I just appreciate that it feels like it's elevated the discourse around ball, and I enjoy that part of it.
That's a good answer. I agree with you completely. And so let's get your opinion first on this. And in fact, I saw Steve Young say it recently. He said that whoever you are as a quarterback, you're probably at your best if you're playing for Kyle Shanahan, at least in today's NFL. Do you agree with that statement, and why?
I don't know if I agree with that statement. I would say that Kyle Shanahan does an outstanding job of getting his quarterbacks to do what he wants them to do, and that's often at a very high level and a very good output for the team. I'm not sure if all quarterbacks across the league would necessarily thrive with their style in that system. I think Kyle's certainly a good enough play caller and offensive architect to make sure that they have high level of success. But to say that, a lot of guys want to go in there and do necessarily the pure progression, do it exactly how he wants it done every single play is probably tough on some guys. So it's one of those things where, if you're just dropping into a bucket, any quarterback, and you got a chance to say this guy or anybody else, yeah, Kyle is absolutely near the top of the list to go in there and have some success.
And when you look at the tape, especially from last week, Mac Jones, is he a guy that fits the bill of what Kyle's looking for? How much is he similar in that way to Brock Purdy?
I mean, wasn't this the story a couple years ago too? I mean, this is pretty wild that it's come full circle to now Mac is the guy who's playing. I want to say this about this, because I think this does a few things. It shows that Mac Jones is certainly more than capable of being an NFL quarterback and going out there and running a good offense at a high level. I think it also highlights what Brock does really well, and maybe was a blind spot for Kyle and company as far as the ability to create and extend and do the things that Brock does really well, and that can kind of makes this offense better. Not that it's not already good without him, but he does some things really well. He throws those intermediate touch throws as well as anybody in the league. And so you see Mac Jones go out there and be certainly competent at some of them, but not as consistent as Brock is. And so you layer those things together and kind of the quickness, the agility that Brock has in the pocket. And it's a pretty cool skill set for Brock Purdy and the Niners to have for a long time. Even, you hopefully want him to be healthy, but it's one of those things where he brings a unique skill set to it. And, to your point earlier, just about any quarterback feels like they can go in there and have some success when you do what Kyle wants you to do.
See, here's one thing I want to sort of wrap with you about, though, on this one. How much do we take from one football game? In other words, now I'm hearing a whole lot of, well, Matt can do this and Matt can do that under Kyle Shanahan. Maybe he certainly did one time. Do you take that to mean that's how it will look, or can we just say, hey, that's one game, let's see it again?
I think you try to do a good job of understanding it's a small sample size. I think that, you don't have to go back very far, though, to Mac Jones's rookie year to realize he can do this. I don't think it has to be one or the other. I think, we'll see how the Saints season progresses, but they're not necessarily trending to be one of the best teams in the league. So if he gets an opportunity to keep playing and play against better defenses, it'll be one of those things where it'll sort itself out. But I think you can celebrate Mac Jones coming into a new situation, playing well, getting the win on the road, getting to 2-0 and realizing like, all right, let's pump the brakes on, anointing maybe a quarterback competition or something silly like that, and just say, this is great to have a backup that seems really competent, and let's see how he does the rest of the way.
And how much can you really learn and benefit, even if it's only one start? And I'm thinking about Sam Darnold when he was here. Then he went on and had a great year in Minnesota. Was he able to really improve that much with mental reps and just practice time?
I think it's probably all of the above. So much of playing quarterback, context matters, organization matters, system matters, who you're surrounded with matters. But also, if you ask Sam and he was being honest, he probably would say he learned a lot from being in that system and seeing how Kyle and company operates and teach concepts and play and practice and all those things. And then he got an opportunity in another situation with another great play caller and another great, cast of Avengers to go out there and play offense at a really high level. So it's one of those things where I think, it's so much of it is situationally important. But, man, it doesn't take away from the fact that this league is so reactionary. You have so much time in between games. It's early in the year. It's a small sample size for everybody across the league. And so you're trying to make all these kind of, overlapping, huge, grasping kind of takeaways. And in reality, you just have to say, hey, that was a nice game, nice win on the road. Now let's on to the next.
JT, I have to get a sense, and this was based on a text exchange you and I had a number of weeks ago. It felt to me like you were a little skeptical that the Niners were going to do well, at least if this injury to Brock was a lengthy period, if it dragged on 3, 4, 5 weeks. Is that fair? Is that how you felt when the injury first got announced?
I mean, I would say it's still how I feel. I think you would be. I think I would feel like if this is a sustained thing and they don't have Brock Purdy moving forward for the season or for a long stretch, it's going to be hard for them to be their best version of themselves. You add in, the injury to Kittle, them not being already full strength on the perimeter, all those types of things. I think it's going to be a lot harder to win than you have a guy who's I don't know how much he's making now, but $50+ million a year quarterback to go out there and run your system that he knows how to run at a high level for many years. You're going to have a drop off. And so it's one of those things you hope, you can survive this, whatever time stretch it is without him. And then when he comes back, you want him to be healthy. You want him to be the best version of himself. You don't want him to be 75% of himself, because so much of what Brock does is with his feet, with his capacity to extend and his quickness and those types of things that, it's one of those things where you're hopeful that they can keep it going. But I don't think anybody would think, yeah, we're just going to operate at the same hum with our backup quarterback in there and all sorts of injuries on the perimeter.
And also having so many new players coming in, and you mentioned George Kittle out, and you had a couple of tight ends get their first touchdowns of the year. As a quarterback, how much of an adjustment is it to throw to different people?
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge factor. That's why you see the continuity as such an important aspect across the league, whether it's coaches, players, relationships, the timing, the offseason. All those things are banked reps that come into play when it matters most. And so, I don't think anybody's going to say September football matters most, but the wins at the start of the year count the same as the wins at the end of the year. So it's important to start stacking those things up and doing whatever it takes. That kind of next men up mentality, that's part of being part of a successful team and organization. But at the same standpoint, we're trying to win the Super Bowl. And so those types of things with that projection, that kind of championship kind of long-term view, it's one of those things where we need everybody healthy to do that.
JT, I look at the dreaded questionable tag, and I wonder, this situation, like many others, everybody wants to balance, hey, we want our best out there, but we want to make sure our best stays out there long term. Can you relate to this? What do you sort of see when the Niners have a decision like this in front of them?
Yeah, it's I would always. It's easy for me or for us not in the building to default to the long-term best interests of the organization, the team, and the player. I think it's a hell of a lot harder when you're that player or you're that team and you got a chance where you feel like, yeah, I could go out there and help my team win, and not necessarily balance the long-term benefit of, and it'd be a lot better if I just got another, 10 days of rest. So it's one of those things where you do have to have the capacity to have that kind of zoom out and have a wider lens view. But if you're the player, it's tough. Everybody kind of tolerates pain at a different level. Everybody kind of can adapt their game depending on the injury to a different level. I can tell you that I've played with what I would classify as kind of tough high ankle sprains, and it's tough. You just feel like you're wearing a boot out there. You can't be yourself. And it's one of those things where as a competitor, you want to be out there. But at the same time, looking back, you're like, man, I definitely wasn't playing necessarily at my best, but also, shoot, I'm not going to, come off the field either. So it's a fine line where sometimes I feel like the player, doesn't necessarily give you the best feedback as far as are they ready to go or not. That's why you got to trust your coaches, trust the team, the medical team, and hopefully have the best long-term perspective that you possibly can.